Yes, I really did work the night shift at a graveyard. I know it's like the quintessential, I would never work that kind of job in the world, but you would be surprised how well they pay. I'm already a night owl and live close by, so it was a no-brainer to take up the job after getting out of college. It was really easy, too, once you get past the boredom. What you're supposed to do is patrol the yard back and forth all night, but to be honest with you, I patrolled it once, maybe twice, a night before just sitting in a small gazebo near a pond for the rest of my shift, watching videos on my phone. At the time, however, my boss was really cracking down on us doing our job properly. Apparently there was a boom in grave robbing in the area, so he wanted to make sure we were on the lookout. He installed new cameras, one directly inside the gazebo, so I had a feeling someone snitched to make sure we were following the proper protocols. So after that, I just popped one earbud in, opened up a podcast, and mindlessly walked back and forth, pretending to look vigilant. Sometimes I would see things, mainly animals like raccoons or possums, since the nearby forest was full of them. But one night I saw something that would turn me, a graveyard night watch, into someone who was deathly afraid of the dark. My therapist advised me to tell this story. She said it would allow me to truly acknowledge what happened, to face my fears and so on. I don't have a lot of family or friends, so the best I got are strangers on the internet. I'll try to get this over with quickly, but thoroughly enough so that I can really relive what happened, and maybe that will shake me loose of whatever grip that night has me in right now. I'm a grown-ass man that has to leave a lamp on when I sleep. I need to get a fucking grip, and this is apparently the best way to do it. Maybe retelling it will help me uncover necessary details for me to cope properly, and as she would say, see what I fear in the dark so much. I was on night patrol, of course. At this point, I had been working that job for about a year or so. I worked it enough that the process of walking up and down a land of corpses became tedious and dreadfully boring. I was alone that night. Sometimes they have two people on watch, but oftentimes I got the shifts where they left me alone. So all I had was me, my podcasts, and the graveyard. I think I was about 5 hours into my 8-hour shift, so my mind had fully turned to mush from the monotonous walking. Just to paint the picture, there were 2 long gravel paths on each side of the main section of the gravesite. There were also smaller pockets of land dedicated to, I guess you would say, special people. Important politicians, local celebrities, and people who died in tragedies, for example. You could only visit these by going off the gravel paths. It was a pain in the ass, but there was a camera pointed at every spot's entrance, so you had to go into them unless you wanted the boss breathing down the back of your neck. I would walk the gravel paths, up and down the rows of gravestones, making sure the dirt was settled and nothing had been vandalized. As I was making my way to the end of the main patch, I could see a figure seemingly kneeling in front of one of the gravestones, their shadow just outside of my flashlight's reach. This isn't an uncommon sight. Sometimes people just sneak in to visit a relative early in the morning during a time of need. I tend to leave those people alone, even though I'm supposed to escort them away. I just don't really think it's up to me to decide when someone has to stop grieving. But I had to at least speak to the person to see if maybe they'll just go if I ask nicely. I walked to the row the person was in and clicked off my flashlight, relying on the moon to light the way for me. I could make out more details as I got closer. It was a man, mid-30s, wearing a beige coat that was so dirty it may as well just have been straight-up brown. His head was hung low, hands on his knees, and his shaggy black hair obscuring his face. I assumed he was praying, so when I got decently closer to him, I waited for him to finish his prayer before I asked him to get going. When I stopped, he lifted his head up while still keeping his shoulders slouched. Even when looking at me, his hair dangled in front of his eyes and his cheeks. I only got a glimpse of seemingly disgust or maybe sadness hanging on his lip. Like he was upset I was interrupting him. He returned his head back into its dangling position without a word. So I spoke. "Hey man, I get it," I said. "I always tried to connect to these people. I mean, I've lost a lot of people in my life. Hell, my sister was buried in that very graveyard. Can't say I never stumbled over there and cried a bit. There's no shame in it. I just got a job to do." He didn't look at me. He didn't utter a word. So I continued to try to build a bridge between us to maybe help him out of the slump he was, literally and figuratively, in. It's real bad, I know. But hey, it gets better. Talk to me about it. Still nothing. No problem with me. I don't want to force anything out of anyone that doesn't want to tell me something. I did shift myself a little bit to get a better look at the gravestones. Aradine Finch, 1912 to 1936. How'd you know her? Great-grandma or something? That was a very nosy thing for me to ask, I know. I felt bad for doing it at the time, but I was really puzzled as to why someone who couldn't be older than 40 was mourning someone who died before he was even born, potentially even before his parents were born. Even if it was a distant relative, who breaks into a graveyard at 4 in the morning to mourn their great-grandma? Still nothing. Just wrap it up eventually, all right, buddy? No rush, but I got a job to do so. Get home safe. I walked out the row and down the rest of the gravel path, peeking into the separate patches, and eventually wrapped back around to the other side of the yard. He was gone by the time I reached that row again. I thought that was weird because the entrance to the site was back where I was coming from. So it was strange to me how I somehow missed him leaving. But I was tired and just wanted to get back to my gazebo so I could rest for a few minutes before repeating the same cycle again. I was actually kind of thankful for him being there. Made my night at least a little bit less boring. I can't believe I ever felt any positive emotion relating to him. Next night, I was walking the paths again, and he was there. Again. This time it was a different grave in a different row. The grave itself was kind of off to the side of the rest of the yard, so this time I approached him from behind. He was on his knees again, but this time his hands were on the ground and his body was lurching forwards. Even from a far distance away, I could see his shoulders rise and fall in a slow, shifting movement, like a dog panting after a walk in the heat. It was so grossly aggressive. I had my flashlight on him this time, so I got a real good look at just how muddy his jacket was. It looked like the dirt was sewed into the fabric of the jacket. I could also get a good look at his blue jeans, also caked in dirt and mud. He wasn't wearing shoes either, his feet bright pink in the spots that weren't earthy brown. My first thought this time was that he was actually a grave robber, which soured me a bit because I knew my boss was going to have my head for allowing a grave robber to probably run off with a bunch of goods last night. Wasn't going to hear the end of it, so I tried to amend it early by getting him out of here now. "Hey!" I called out, trying my best to potentially scare him into instantly coming clean. He stayed hunched over in front of the grave. I stomped over, my light shaking with my furious steps, causing the man to flash in and out of frame. I stood over him, my light giving me a glimpse at the name on the grave. Sandy Mandor, 1997 to 2018. "Hey man, what the fuck are you doing here?" He snapped his head up at me. His hair was plastered to his face, which had a sheen of wet glow on it as my light lit it up. His hair split and turned in a way that allowed me to get a good look at one of his eyes. They stared a hole into me, pure rage and anger in them, like a blinking red light intended for warning people to evacuate an area immediately. He was gritting his sickly yellow teeth at me, like a snarling animal backed into a corner. I saw his grip on the dirt beneath him tighten up, his knuckles whitening, almost tearing out the grass within his fist. He then spoke to me. "You are not supposed to be here," he spouted, dribbles of spit dangling out as he pronounced his SS. Before I let out a light "what?" he pushed out a rage-filled rant as if speaking was causing him harm. "You walk over their land. Their land. They don't belong here. You trap them, hide them, obscure them." I instinctively took a few steps away from him as the madman was practically screaming at me, ripping out handfuls of dirt and grass to exaggerate his words. Tightening myself up, I reapproached him, trying to portray myself in a more calming way. "Hey man, all right, calm down. I'm not here to hurt you, okay? I'm just doing my job. I just want to know what you're doing out here." His bottom jaw was jutted out, and his eyes danced crazily back and forth, bouncing around its socket like a fly trapped in a cup. Every pant produced a deep, guttural growl from the man. I now thought that this man was either drugged out or mentally disturbed in some way, and this was a manic episode. You bastard! Let them free of your curse. I will free them. Breathe them new life, and when they find you, they will tear you apart. They will spread your organs across the sun. At this point, I felt like there was nothing I could really do. I didn't want to hurt this possibly schizophrenic man, and I damn sure didn't want to disturb any of the nearby graves trying to restrain him. I stepped away, slowly, and walked back up the path to the gazebo. I decided to call my superior, Benny. He was much more chill than my boss, and I knew he was up since he also works night shifts, so his sleep schedule was as fucked as mine. I thought he would know what to do since he had been doing this for years. I have never seen anyone act like this on the site. I've seen people scream and cry but never cuss me out and speak in the way this man was speaking. It sounded like randomly assorted gospel shit spouted from a God-fearing man at his wit's end. If there was anyone who knew how to deal with that, it would be Benny. He picked up right away. "What's up? Hey Benny, how you doing?" "I'm good, man. You?" Yeah, I'm good. I just got a problem and needed your thoughts on it." "What's the issue?" "There is this dirty guy kneeling by a gravestone. Every time I get close to him, he freaks the fuck out and says that I am like holding the bodies hostage or something, and that he wishes to free them." I acted as if this was the first time I had seen him. I didn't want Benny to know I saw him yesterday and let him stay around, especially with how he is acting now. Didn't need that potential fine falling onto my head. "Did you ask him to fuck off?" I asked him what he was doing. "But not to fuck off," he said in a mocking tone, acting as if me calling him was a waste of time. "I doubt that will work, man. He seems pretty dead set on staying there. Call the cops." "No, I just think he's out of it right now." "Druggy? Maybe. I don't know. But he's not in the best place, and I don't think being shoved into the back of the cruiser will help him. But letting him defile a grave is going to help, right? I just want to talk him down, you know? He doesn't need the drama of the police. I just want him to settle down." Sounds like he's religious of some kind. Those people tend to get really frantic about how you treat bodies. Maybe we're doing something he hates. Just lie to him. He'll fall into it. Say we're just storing the bodies for the Lord of some bullshit. I hated how he didn't take the situation seriously. Maybe that was just the inexperience speaking in me, but I really care about getting this man out of here without causing any problems. I felt like this was a pretty big deal and that I couldn't just bullshit my way through it like Benny was suggesting. But I went to him for advice, so I prepared to trek back up to the man and find a weak point in his ideology to whittle him down through. "All right, Benny, I'll try. Can I stay on the phone with you, though?" I heard a deep cackle from the other side, which I returned with a light chuckle. "See you when I see you, Cassidy." I hung up and walked back down to where the man was. He was gone once again. I walked over to the gravestone to see if I could fix any potential damages the man may have caused during his fit. The grass was a bit disturbed, but the grave itself seemed untouched. Just the area surrounding it that was torn at, which wasn't a hard fix. I just tried to press bits of dirt into the small, empty patches. Hunch over, I noticed a shimmering glow on the settled dirt that covered the grave. It was like a small splash of water was spilt onto the grave, soaking into the compacted dirt. It glistened heavily, a polishing glow. I didn't call Benny back. I just continued the rest of my shift. I was a bit shaken up, I can't lie, just the way the man broke down in front of me. The crazed look in his eyes, that seething hatred he was shooting at me, the messy clothes, the yellow teeth, those animalistic pants. It all stuck with me that shift. And for the first time in a very long time, I did my rounds a little bit fast and stayed in the gazebo a little bit longer. I got the next night off. Benny worked that night. He called and bullshitted me about how he saw the man carrying away a skeleton on top of a boat of possums. I didn't buy it for a second, nor did I find it funny. The night after was the one shift I got where I didn't work by myself, and I was very grateful for it. Me and Benny shared the shift. As I pulled up to the site to replace the afternoon crew, I heard them giggling about a man in the woods. I asked them what they were talking about, and they told me that Benny had spoken about my encounter the other night, adding some unsavory details to it to really ham up the mythos. When we began our shift, I brought it up to him. You told everyone? I said, making the anger clear in my voice so that he knew I wasn't a fan of this joke. Just for safety purposes. You told them he was butt-ass naked and was carrying a dead possum. I watch him struggle to contain his laughter before he fully combusts, buckling over in joy at his own lie circling around back to me. Come on, it's a little funny, he said after collecting himself. You're going on first, asshole. He reluctantly began to walk down the gravel path first. When we work in pairs, we take turns going around the site so that the other person gets an extra long break. It was by far the best part of working there, getting those 35 minutes to myself. It reminded me of a time before they added those cameras, and I spent hours by myself at that gazebo. It was the moment of calm I needed, as I felt myself get anxious being by myself out in the yard. I don't know why it was really getting to me. Soon, I became a skittish mess, constantly snapping around at the sound of a leaf rustling or owl shooting. I took out both earbuds, trying to stay as vigilant as possible. When I passed over the areas the man was previously at, I purposely looked away. I'd rather Benny find him than me. While at the gazebo, my moment of silence was interrupted by the buzzing of my walkie-talkie. I picked it up and listened in. I heard Benny's voice crackle through. Hey man, I fucking saw him. Oh, was he clothed this time? I said, assuming Benny was fucking with me again. No man, this isn't a bit. Honest. I still didn't buy it. I don't know if that was because I didn't trust Benny, or if it was because I just didn't want to face the possibility of that man being out there again. What are you talking about? I said. It was all my mind could come up with after a few seconds of panicked thinking. I was going by that patch of land dedicated to the St. Momery victims, right? St. Momery was a church that had a shooting only a few years back. I took a deep breath, and with caution and fear having me in a chokehold, I whispered, Was he there? Motherfucker was peering at me from the woods. Benny took a moment to catch his breath. It was only then that I noticed he had in some way physically exerted himself. It also gave me time to take a mental breather. One that was all too short. Fucker was... I heard like a branch break and turned around. He was right in between the trees, staring at me. And he said that he was about to start giving them life, that I was impeding on his ceremony. He walked into the forest and I got the fuck out of there. The horror of the man potentially being anywhere gripped me tightly. I suddenly felt fear creep around my shoulders like bugs walking on my skin just beneath my clothes. I constantly felt the feeling that I was being watched, stared at from a distance edge of the forest, just outside of my vision. Where are you now? I demanded. About halfway up the right path. I'm coming back to the gazebo and I'm going to... We're calling the fucking cops, man, I agreed. When he showed up, his normally slicked back hair was spiraling and sprawled. I could see that fear grabbed him as it had grabbed me. Even more apparent than his fear was the apologetic look that blanketed his face. We both stayed at the gazebo. We couldn't build up the courage of walking down the gravel paths towards the entrance. The man could be anywhere in the trees, and we didn't want to risk any chance of running into him again. We told the police where we were and what had been going on. They showed up, they searched everywhere, they found nothing. Even worse, the cameras somehow caught nothing. None of the cameras were pointed directly at the graveyard. They were just along the paths because they were more for us than they were for intruders. We were meant to stop intruders. So with no evidence found, my boss insisted I worked my next shift. Another shift that I worked alone. Nobody was willing to cover my shift. Nobody was willing to work with me. I should have quit then and there. But in some ways, it was probably better that I was there. I stayed in the gazebo for an extra long this time. All my coworkers thought I was crazy. They laughed even harder today as I arrived at the site. To them and everyone else, this man had been some stupid urban legend they were spreading between each other. But to me, he was out there. I stared out into the dark that held the man. Somewhere in that deep, putrid void was those yellow teeth and manic eyes doing God knows what with those graves. I was stunned in fear, completely locked inside my own body. Up to that point in my life, I had never been so afraid where I was physically unable to move. Hell, I could barely think. I was almost catatonic. Just a shell trapped inside a gazebo hiding from the monsters that lurk in the dark. Like I'm a fucking kid. I didn't go out there. I couldn't. I was a coward, and I stayed put. My phone buzzed alive, almost shaking me free from my glazed-over state. Slowly, like the heater of a car causing frost to weaken and slide off its windows, I woke back up and reached for my phone. It was my boss. He was saying something to me, but I wasn't listening or responding. I turned myself around, staring off into the pond. The moon reflected against it in the prettiest way imaginable. Took my mind off my job for just a moment. My boss hung up, and I was back to being alone. Alone with him. I'm told by the police that they found me at around 4:30, still in the gazebo, dazed off looking at the water, like I was in a trance. Doctors described it as almost like a fugue state. I describe it as cowardice. The first thing I remember was the chief of police speaking to me in the gazebo. "Cassidy?" he said, shaking my shoulder as if it would physically shake off my nerves. I don't really get why that man scared me so badly at that time. I guess that's what writing this down was supposed to help me understand, but I still don't get why he froze me so badly. "Yes, sir." I shuddered awake and responded. "You all right?" "No, sir, I'm really not." He sat at the other side of the table. "I see that, son. Well, your boss got in contact with us, and we're very glad he did." I was very confused. What would cause my boss to make a random 911 phone call? Why did he call you guys? "He was worried about you, son. Said you were speaking incoherently. A lot of people were worried about you, with all that talk about a man in the forest." I felt anger boil up inside me, the first extreme emotion I had felt in hours. Hot, rushing lava melting my chilled interior. "We found him," he finished. That anger swirled and whirlpool inside my body, swaying and mixing with new emotions until it created an unrecognizable concoction of joy, fear, satisfaction, confusion, and many other things. That cocktail of emotions made me weak. The chief saw the distress I was going through, so he continued without me responding. "Your boss sent us here for a wellness checkup on you, and we just so happened to stumble across a man walking around the gravesite, mumbling to himself about resurrection. He was covered head to toe in dirt, carrying a small shovel like one you could find in a little kid's sandbox. He became violent when we approached him. We took him away and then scanned the area for damages and for you." Emerging from that sludge of emotion was a powerful, potent flavor. Curiosity. Curiosity driven by fear. What did I allow the man to do while I was out of action? So I asked the chief that. The boys took a look and called me. What they found. The chief paused and held his hand up to his mouth as if speaking his next set of words would be equivalent to vomiting. There were multiple graves that were upturned, disturbed. We found multiple traces of human semen around these graves. That weakening feeling intensified as I felt the need to throw up. My whole body felt off, like someone had taken out and replaced all my organs, only for my body to begin rejecting every one of them. I held my hand to my mouth as I violently gagged to the thought of this man pleasuring himself at these grave sites, defiling the last remnants of beloved family members and friends. When I collected myself, I noticed that the chief gave me a look that insinuated he wasn't done giving me details. His eyes squinting so hard you would think he was witnessing the acts he was describing right in front of his very own eyes. All affected graves were female, but to be honest, we don't know just how many graves he acted on. "I'm sorry, son. It isn't your fault." He has one more thing to say to me, however. I could see it in his eyes, that there was something hanging on the tip of his tongue, wiggling and writhing around like fish bait, bumping and piercing his lips until it bursted free. He didn't stop with just the surface of the graves, however. There was one grave over by the graves dedicated to those who died in the St. Montgomery shooting. My body was sapped of all life as I felt my chest grow heavy. A slab of pure concrete slammed across my lungs and heart. Acting off a pure horror, I sprinted out of the gazebo. I could feel the blood struggling to fill up my legs after being inactive for hours, brute forcing their way through my arteries to propel myself down the gravel path as fast as they could. I could see a few cruisers pulled up down the path, and I could feel tears well up in my eyes alongside vomit in my throat. My head suffered a piercing sting. The information it just received was so unbelievable to me, I think my brain was punishing itself for believing it for even a second. Yet there I was running. I arrived at the section of land dedicated to those lost in the St. Momery shooting. In the center was a casket grave that had all the dirt brushed off the top of it and the lid removed. I've been told by police that I fought off multiple officers who tried to stop me from entering the scene. I don't remember that, however. All I remember was walking past that police tape and feeling my world slowing down, like some sick taunt. Like it wanted me to feel every millisecond that passed, just so I could suffer just a little bit more. I looked over the top of the grave. I saw my little sister's decomposed body. It was thoroughly defiled by him, disturbed by him, and preventable by me. He did this all while I sat in the gazebo, like a fucking coward. Again, I don't remember much from this time, but I have been told that I was completely incomprehensible. I threw up, I cried, I shouted, I fought, and I had to be physically removed from the scene by multiple officers. Dragged kicking and screaming, like a fucking child. That's what haunts me in the dark. It's really all my fault.